Hello, BookTube. This is Weekly Reads. As I've mentioned a few times over the last few months, it goes without failing that some part of my monthly reading plan will fail. And if you were to make a bet as to which books I would most likely bail on, which part of my reading plan would most likely fail, you would win your bet if you bet on either Intruder in the Dust by William Faulkner or Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, translated from the Korean by Anton. Let's start with Intruder in the Dust. Intruder in the Dust is a later Yoknepanalfa County novel. It is set sometime in the 1920s and is about Lucas Beecham, an elderly African American who is falsely accused of murdering Vincent Gowrie, a ne'er-do-well white man. Lucas is exonerated largely through the efforts of a teenage white boy whose name is, I believe, Charles. What exactly his surname is, I think I missed it over the course of the 3.5 chapters that I read. I have a very complicated reading history with William Faulkner. More than 20 years ago, I read 3 of his novels for 2 classes in college. As I Lay Dying and Light in August for a class focused on Southern literature, or the literature of the American South, I should say, and The Sound and the Fury, which was for a modern and postmodern fiction class. I rather liked As I Lay Dying and The Sound and the Fury when I first read them 20 years ago, and I bailed on Light in August. In the last few years, as I've been on BookTube, and I have periodically tried to participate in Faulkner in August, a BookTube event in which participants read the work of William Faulkner in August, I have had less luck with either The Sound and the Fury or As I Lay Dying. And over the course of this year so far, I have had a very major hunger for modern and contemporary fiction. And so I thought maybe I should participate in this year's Faulkner in August and see if maybe I can get back into him. And it failed. So what immediately put me off the novel is the stream of consciousness technique that he uses, which can sometimes be attractive, but in this case was very much not. The story is told from the point of view of Charles, who has contradictory feelings towards Lucas. On the one hand, there is a sense of obligation. When Charles was younger, he and 2 African American boys were out hunting rabbits, and Charles fell into a creek and was rescued by Lucas, who then took him and his companions to his house and let them dry off, warm up, and fed them. Charles tried to pay Lucas for this kindness and was refused. And this set off a bit of an gift-giving war between the 2 of them, where Charles gave 2 gifts to Lucas, and Lucas returned the favor with some molasses. At the same time, Charles is very much a young man of his era. He is racist. And so throughout these chapters, you're never entirely sure whether or not Charles wants to help Lucas or just run away. And what really put me off the novel was the visit that Charles's uncle made to Lucas. Charles's uncle is one of the town lawyers. And that conversation was just milky. I was thinking, okay, if you look at Intruder in the Dust as a mystery, then Faulkner is basically trying to wring out as much of the solution to this mystery as he can. And I couldn't take it. So I bailed on it. And I don't think I'm making much sense in my reasons why. Anyway, moving on to Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, translated from the Korean by Anton. So Cursed Bunny is a collection of short stories that I'm reading for both Women in Translation Month and also a short story summer. So Cursed Bunny ticks 2 of the prompts for Women in Translation Month. Genre fiction and not a novel. So Cursed Bunny is a collection of short stories that are mostly horror infused. At least the 3 that I read. So Head is about a woman whose bodily excretions and what she uses to clean herself up begin to accumulate into something that resembles a human head that can communicate. And this head begins to harass its progenitor until after decades a full body is formed and the body attempts to play a replacement game. And I hated that story. It stank. Pun intended, if that was a pun. The second story I read, Embodiment, is about a woman whose menstrual cycle is having issues. And to resolve it, she's prescribed copious amounts of birth control pills, which seemingly somehow or other leads to her having an immaculate conception. And her obstetrician recommending her finding a father for the child, which I'm not entirely sure what that's supposed to do. And it was just kind of stupid. And the third story is the title story, Cursed Bunny, which is about a warlock whose family specializes in creating cursed objects, who takes revenge for a childhood friend of his whose family company was destroyed by a larger corporation. And so he creates a cursed object, the Cursed Bunny of the title, and this lamp wreaks havoc on the company and its CEO and his family. And while that story was okay, it just seemed a little lifeless to me. So by that point, I'm like, I don't want to read any more of this. Now, I did come into, when I made my August reading plan, I had some concerns about Cursed Bunny because it is speculative fiction. It is pretty much horror. I haven't really enjoyed science fiction or fantasy for several years now. And while I do periodically try it to see if maybe the spark will light again, it hasn't. So So much for Cursed Bunny. Now, my other reading this week has been more successful, starting with a successful Balle redemption of Kairos by Rene Erpenbeck, translated from the German by Michael Hofmann. Kairos is about a young woman named Katharina who falls in love with the much older Hans in the waning years of the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany. The novel sort of narrates the experiences of these two people as they fall in love, as they navigate their affair. Hans is married and has a string of former lovers, while this is Katharina's first long-term relationship. And the sort of how this relationship transitions from the heady days of falling in love to an increasingly toxic mess of a relationship as the German Democratic Republic ceases to exist in the very early 90s. I really enjoyed this novel, particularly like the early part when the relationship is just going. I thought that one was really good and a bit stronger. The second section, I think, is maybe a little more rushed. And I think perhaps more clarity could have been given to the end of the relationship, particularly as Katharina seems to finally be tired of Hans or willing to leave him. But yeah, I really enjoyed Kairos, and I'm not entirely sure why I did not finish this novel the first time I tried to read it. Next up is She Who Remains by Rene Karabash, translated from the Bulgarian by Isidora Angel. So, She Who Remains is about a woman, Bekia, who is the older child of a small family and is very much the apple of her father's eye, who really wanted a boy. Bekia lives in a tribal area of Albania, which operates under a set of local traditions called the Kanem. And she is one day informed that she is to be married off. And she's not happy about it. And on the day before, or shortly before the wedding, she has an encounter with a distant cousin of hers, who, during their time together, the cousin has pretty reached to Bekia. And so they have an encounter. And since she's no longer a virgin, Bekia will be killed on her wedding day, because part of this tradition is the husband is allowed to kill his new bride if she's proven to be not a virgin. So to save herself, Bekia becomes a sworn virgin. And this allows her to transition from the female Bekia to the male Mekia. And so for the next decade and a half, Mekia is a man in this community. However, because of this, her betrothed's family's honor is stained. And so he and his brother are allowed to kill one of the male members of Mekia's family. And Mekia chooses his brother Saleh, who is a disappointment to his father. Saleh does the sensible thing and runs off, which means that Murash, the father, is killed. And over the next... and so the scars of this incident and betrayals lead to a reconciliation 16 years later between Saleh and Mekia that is rather nice to read. I rather enjoyed She Who Remains. I thought the novel is rather poetic and beautiful at times. Although, of what I've read so far of the 2026 Booker International Booker Prize long list, it's not necessarily one of the top ones, if that makes any sense. I think I'm going to read all of the long list of this year's International Booker Prize and talk about them all then and rank them and what have you. So, moving on to the last book I read this week. I read Talking It Over by Julian Barnes. This is a novel about three people, Stuart, Gillian, and Oliver. Stuart and Oliver are best friends. They have been for years, since they were in school together. Gillian is married to Stuart. However, on Gillian and Stuart's wedding day, Oliver falls in love with Gillian and must have her. So if gradually Gillian begins to fall in love with Oliver, and things go to hell in a handbasket from there. What I really liked about the novel is the technique that Barnes uses. Each chapter is composed of the narration of Stuart, Gillian, Oliver, and occasionally other characters. And so together they form a composite of what happened, of how Stuart and Gillian got together, how they ended, and how Gillian and Oliver got together, and how Stuart never got over it. So I really like the technique, and how it is quite metafictional, because all of the characters are talking to not each other, but to the reader, who is acting as a sort of group therapist for everybody. However, I hate the ending. I hate the ending. Hate it. So that's what I read this past week. For the week ahead, I will be reading The Stranger's Child by Alan Hollinghurst. I am working my way through the work of Alan Hollinghurst. And next up is The Stranger's Child. I also hope to get to Heartlamp by Banu Mushtaq, translated from the Kannada by Deepa Bhasthi, which will work for Short Story Summer. Returning to the 2026 International Booker Prize, I will be reading The Nights Are Quiet in Tehran by Shida Bazyar, translated from the German by Ruth Martin. And I will be reading, hopefully, On the Calculation of Volume 1 by Solvej Balle, translated from the Danish by Barbara Barbara Haveland. Now, this is, again, speculative fiction. It's about a woman who's repeating the same day over and over. I don't know how I will react to this. Maybe I'll like it. Maybe I won't. We shall see. So that's my plan for this coming reading week. Which means that I may have some extra reading spaces towards the end of August. And will report what those books might be in forthcoming weekly reads. So until I see you next week, BookTube, thank you. Have a great rest of your afternoon and have a great weekend.